Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us, where we will learn in this video how to model our setup for nature that we have showed earlier in our previous video, and how we set up the material inside Quixel Mixer, and how we did the cloth simulation for the sofa set. So let's get started. So before you start modeling your furniture set, it's always useful to find the best source of references and technical information regarding the products. We find out that Minotti include these information. So if we go to the sofas section, we have chosen a design called white. You can find it at the end of the page. Sorry about the scroll down. And inside the white, the images that we have chosen to be our reference was number 15 and 16. So based on these two images, we've developed our sofa. So after that, we downloaded the technical sheet. You can also download the OrCAD file and the 3D file. But in our case, because we want to build this from scratch and to unwrap it correctly, to send it to Mixer and then to Unreal Engine. So inside Blender, after adding the two image references inside the image editor, so we'll start by adding a single vertex, extrude this on the y-axis by 0.78 centimeters based on the technical sheet, and then extrude this on the x-axis by 2.45. Now, after we finish closing up this shape by pressing F, select all the vertex, pressing F again, extrude this by 0.15 centimeters. Now we can start by copying this shape by adding, for example, the back of that sofa, so we can rotate it on the x-axis on 90 degree. Now after that, we'll start by adjusting the scale. So we know that this is 0.78 centimeters, then we will adjust it according to the dimension that we have in the reference. And once we finish with modeling the base of the sofa, at the end we'll just subdivide by Ctrl R on one of the edges to subdivide each side. Let's say, for example, to this amount, and also on the z-axis. So after finishing modeling the base of the sofa, we've just added a simple bevel to the sharp edges of these objects. So after that, let's go into edge mode, select sharp edges, right click, mark scene, and then go to the UV editing, create a new texture, 4K, and then select all the faces, U for unwrap, and then unwrap it. Now this is simply now unwrapped, and the last thing we will do is to adjust later on the direction of each part of this object. If the texture direction is flowing onto this direction, then we need to have them all aligned to that direction. You can simply do that by rotating each part of the unwrapped element of the object. Next, we want to bring our model base here to match the reference image, as you can see here. We can do that using two methods. The first one is by sculpting. So if we add a subdivision modifier, increase this to 2, and go into sculpting mode and face set by seams. Now we can start. First, let's make sure that in the advanced mode you have selected the face set boundary, and you can pick your preferred brush and start sculpting on top of your base model here, and smooth it out by pressing Shift. Move this over here and smooth this until we reach to the matching shape, as we can see in the reference. But this method is actually a time consuming. The second method is by cloth simulation. So we'll start by activating the cloth and the physics properties of each of these objects, and also add a subdivision modifier, increase this to 2. Now adding subdivision below or above cloth modifier, we'll talk about this more later on in this tutorial. Now before we start adding the same modifiers to each object, we can select them all and then hit, the last one will be basically the one that have the modifier, and hit Ctrl L and copy modifiers. So we don't need to do this individually. Now our target here is that we want to simulate all of them together until we reach to this shape. Before doing that, we need to set a vertex group, meaning we don't want all the object to be cloth simulated. We will choose which and which not going to be simulated. So to do that, we'll go into object data properties, and then we'll select the vertex that are basically facing other vertex from the objects. And in the bottom also as well. Now these vertex that we have selected are the one that will not be included in the cloth simulation. So we'll name this as non-cloth and assign it. So when we go inside the cloth modifier, inside the shape, we'll add them so they will not be part of the simulation. Then we will add a pressure, set the pressure value, for example, to 15. And the vertex mass, we can start by adding, let's say, for example, 0.15. And for the stiffness, we need to increase this, let's say, for 250. I'm gonna drag this a little bit here. And for the compression, let's make it 150. Increase also the tension in the dumping. And once we finish, let's isolate this, because if we run the simulation, everything else will fall down. So in the simulation mode, we'll start to see that the pressure is inflating these vertex based on the properties that we have set up. Now we can see now that we start to get a little bit closer to what we have in the reference. And as for the vertex that are not part of the simulation, they are still as they are. So we will add the same thing to the other object and start the simulation again. So here we are after adding the same properties for the other object as well. Let's run the simulation. And at frame 27, for example, we can start to see something similar to what we want to achieve, or closer enough. All right, so the next thing we'll do is to create the cushions. Okay, let's create now the cushions by adding a simple plane. Rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees, scale it down a lot. On the front view, let's move it the x-axis. And then let's add more edge loops in both directions. Select all the faces, extrude it again to the y-axis by -10 centimeters. At this point, it is really recommended to always check your normals. They are correct. Blue means they are fine. So now we can add a cloth modifier, and let's go to frame number 0 and add a subdivision modifier. Now the difference between adding the subdivision before and after is that if you add it before the cloth simulation, it means that the simulation will run after adding a huge number of vertex, and this is gonna make the simulation a little bit slow. So this is actually help the simulation to work much better. Let's add also some edge loop cuts on the edge so we can adjust the end. All right, so inside the cloth modifier, we'll keep it as an angular, keep also the vertex mass at this value. Now, the major adjustments that you can add to your cloth modifier is the bending and the stiffness. And before that, let's also activate the pressure. And if we run the simulation now, we can see now that the simulation is not what we want. We want less bending. So less bending means increasing this value and the stiffness. Let's say, for example, to 25. And this is much better now. So to add more details, just increase this a little bit, 0.65, and maybe also increase the shear to 20. Make sure that the collision distance is set to 0.01. Now, according to our reference, we'll put another one in front and position this. Let's position it before it starts to simulate. And let's also add a dummy object in front of them so it prevents them from falling down. So this will act just as a basic collision object. and then we will delete it later. The outer thickness to the minimum. And before also running the simulation, let's add a collision effect for both of them. Alright, so let's now run the simulation, see what's going to happen. So let's bring this a little bit to the back. And at this point, let's hide this. And now this seems like what we were looking for, but we just want to add a little bit of details. And this is where we can actually use the sculpting to add a bit of details here and there. Now, before applying the subdivision, let's unwrap our object. So going back to frame 0 and going into select sharp edges, UV editing, add this mark C, and let's put this again to a 4K picture and unwrap it as well. Again, the UV at this point is not set to the final. You can adjust the direction of them later on once you see the texture applied to it. Means, for example, if we bring our texture over here, for example, now it has a one direction. So if we choose this, for example, by pressing L, it seems like it's going into this vertical direction. And this is okay for now, as they all will be in the same direction. Okay, so now we will apply all the modifiers and then start to see how we can add a little bit of sculpting effect to them. So if we go to the sculpting mode now, make sure our object that we want to sculpt is selected, and the face set, we gotta choose the UV seams. Make sure also in the advanced tab, choosing the face set's boundary. Alright, so we have a cloth brush here that will help us actually add more details, and this can be also changed over here by the drag or the push. I always prefer to use the force fall off to a plane, as this helps actually to add a better way of sculpting details. Let's add the grab, for example. And once we finish, we can now add a shade smooth to our object. And we're gonna keep adding details. Now, after doing all of these steps, we have finished sculpting the sofa, and also we managed to model our choice of coffee table from also the same site, along with the side table over here, and also the chair. Then we apply the same technique to the chair cushion. The carpet, however, after we finish all of that, we added collision effect to all the bases of the chair and the table and the sofas as well. Increase the subdivision and simulate to get a little bit a collision effect as we have here. Now it's time to move to Quixel Mixer to start texturing them. So I'll start with the sofa. So inside Quixel Mixer, after importing our OBJ object that we have exported from Blender, we can now see that in the first layer set, we have our objects divided by their materials that was assigned inside Blender. So if you, for example, activate, let's say, for example, the cushions number 2, it will choose selection. And this is very useful when we add the material inside Quixel Mixer. Now we need to add a custom material, and this can be done by downloading a texture from Feedback, for example, and adjusting the material size and dimension before exporting this to Quixel Mixer. So in the image size, let's put this, for example, to 4K, and that it's a square. Now we can save this as the albedo channel, and then we can go inside the filter 3D and generate a normal map. Increase the scale as you prefer to have the details on top of this texture. And then we can export it to Quixel Mixer to use it also as the normal. Last thing, you we'll need is the height map, which can also be created directly from the same location. Once you have all of these textures created, you can import your custom material and assign them in the available into their places. So we already did that and we created our texture before. So I'm gonna assign it by selecting the material. And the first thing you'll notice that the scale is a little bit out of size. We can do that by going to placement and select tiling. And now we can adjust the rotation of the X and Y until we reach to the desired look of the material. If you're facing this problem of scrolling in by the mouse, you can simply go to the setup and increase the scale factor, for example, to 10. This will help you to have better control when you zoom in. Now we can adjust the material color, the metalness, and the roughness as well, as we did before with our texturing tutorials for the house itself. Now we can add also another texture set and call this the wood table. And now we will choose only the wood. And we created also another texture using the same method by downloading it from Freeback and import it inside Photoshop. Now we need to disable the displacement, and I need also to browse for the image as it's not readable from this location. Now we can also adjust the tiling. Now, as you can see, this is what we were referring to as the direction of the wood. If this direction of the material is not actually part of your design or by your reference image, you can adjust the direction of the texture by going back to unwrap and adjust the direction of the face. Let's see how we're going to do that. So here inside Blender, this is our table that we need to adjust the texture for. I'm going to select all the faces and do a smart UV project. And then move all the faces outside, because we're going to adjust also the size of these faces. So for example, for this one, let's bring it here inside and rotate it to 90 degrees. Or actually, it's already rotated, so we can increase the scale of the textile density of that specific face. And let's select all the other faces as well and do the same thing. And once we finish adjusting all of that, then we can also export it back to Quixel Mixer. So back in Quixel Mixer, after we have adjusted the orientation of this face, now we have a flow of the texture in the right direction. So now we can add also another layer of wood texture just to add another details on top of that. Let's adjust also the tiling, make it, for example, and adjust the scale. And we can also add a mask to add curvature and increase the levels a little bit. We can also adjust how the maps are layering on top of each other, so we can make it, for example, as the max, or we can make it as a multiply and increase the contrast here a little bit. Not just the normal, for example, 2.2, and inside the other one maybe we can also adjust over here. So if we move the light, you can see now that we have reflection and details on top of this wood texture. We can also add a scratch material as available inside Quixel Mixer once you install it. And we're gonna adjust how this mask is layering on top of these textures. Let's first adjust the color, something, for example, more brown, and in the tiling we'll add a curvature and increase the level a little bit. We can also adjust the opacity so we don't have so to minimize the amount of color on top. Last thing, I'm gonna adjust the color itself of the wood a little bit darker, and I guess that will be enough. So we'll do the same thing with the whole model that we have finished, along with the chair and the carpet and everything, and export this back to Blender and export it to Unreal Engine using that aspect. So let's open Unreal Engine, see how things will go when we import the model. So here inside Unreal Engine, after importing our setup for nature, the living area that we have modeled earlier, as you can see, the materials that we have imported from Quixel Mixer shows a nice resolution effect, along with all the other textures set normal and the roughness and the metal. This is how we connected our scalar parameters, and you always have control over them if you want to increase the normal or the reflection as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have any questions, please share it down in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.